Well, you might wonder what a pack of cigarettes has to do with a prisoner of war camp in Germany, other than the fact that neither one of them are any good for your health. But if you give me a few minutes, I'll explain the connection. It all really started for me at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Sunday, December 7th, 1941. I was driving to Port Washington, Wisconsin to meet a friend. We had the radio on and we heard about the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Well, after the shock had worn off a little bit, I was raring to go. Most of us were. I came to Madison from my home in Fond du Lac, had my physical, and in January of 1942, at the age of 23, I was inducted into the service. Now, I went into the Army Air Corps, which was one of the first draftee groups in the Air Force. Started my training at Fort Sheridan, Illinois, and got stationed at an auxiliary air base in Holton, Maine. Now, I was managing the PX, but this isn't what I signed up for. I mean, I'd had a job at Sears before the war, and well, this didn't seem much different. I mean, I'd wanted to get into the flying end of it. So in November of '42, I took a series of tests that qualified me to be a bombardier. 6 months later, I was stationed with a bomb group in Clovis, New Mexico. We trained with crews flying B-24 Liberators, although we called them flying boxcars on account of their shape. From there, we were stationed with an air patrol on the east coast of the United States looking for submarines. And in January of 1944, we flew to northern Africa, eventually landing at Manduria Air Force Base on March 10th, 1944, in southern Italy. So there I was, a second lieutenant in the 723rd Squadron, 450th Bomb Group, nicknamed the Cottontails on account of our distinctive white tail fins. And in keeping with tradition, we gave our aircraft a nickname, Little Lady Joyce, affectionately called Lady. We were only there a couple of days before we started flying missions. Our first one was to hit some submarine pens at Toulon in the south of France. And in quick succession, we bombed targets in Austria and Italy. We were the same crew every time, 10 of us. I still remember their names and still see their faces. Boys from Texas, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Kansas, and me from Wisconsin at 25 years of age, the oldest one in the crew. And boy, did we get to know each other. The B-24 is a big plane, but the pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, and front gunner are all crammed into it like sardines. The top turret and the ball turret, the two waist gunners are all close together, so only the rear gunner has any kind of privacy. But who'd want to be a tail-end Charlie? Now, like I said, we started flying missions right away. Targets in Austria, Yugoslavia, Romania, you name it. All told, the 450th flew an average of 4 missions a week. Now, I wasn't on all of them, of course, but over 74 days, I flew a total of 32 missions, always with the same crew. Well, except for my last mission. One of our waist gunners, Tech Sergeant Frank Davis, got sick, and a kid from Blytheville, Arkansas, took his position. Now, our target that day was the main airfield at Wollersdorf, just south of Vienna. The ground fire was heavy, but it was the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, that gave us our biggest problems. Now, their fighters were swarming around us like hornets, and we were one of the ones that got an unlucky strike. Our tail got hit hard, and fire was soon spreading through the fuselage. Our pilot, Lieutenant Tom Griffin, rang the emergency bell. "Bail out, boys!" But we all scrambled for the exits. The poor kid in the front gunner position was so terrified I had to drag him by his boots to get him out of there. But everybody knew the drill and did what they were supposed to, except for the replacement waist gunner. Now, it was his job to release a mechanism on the ball turret that allowed the gunner to get out, but either he forgot or he panicked or maybe it jammed, who knows. But as we parachuted out, we could see Our Lady in flames as she plummeted into the mountainside. 22-year-old Staff Sergeant Harry Stewart of Pennsylvania went with her. My parachute got caught in a tree, but I worked my way loose and I managed to meet up with Lieutenant Griffin. We found another flyer who'd been injured in landing, and we rigged up a litter from his parachute and hauled him with us as we slogged our way westward through the mountains, thinking we'd make it to Switzerland. Now, out of nowhere, a civilian appeared, waving a gun and shouting in German. Frankly, he seemed more scared than we were. Now, we didn't know if he was friend or foe, but he took us to a little cabin where we rested for a while. Now, next thing you know, 2 burly guys burst in, ordering us to our feet. Now, they marched us off to a nearby town with a train station, and as we entered the building, we could see other U.S. airmen and a big picture of Hitler on the wall. "Well, John," said Tom, "I guess these Austrians weren't our friends." We were loaded onto trains and taken cross-country to an interrogation center just outside of Frankfurt. We were held in solitary confinement and questioned one at a time. But they were clever, these guys. They knew that some of our men were smokers, so they'd put cigarettes on the table, lighting one, blowing smoke in the air, taunting them. Some of the guys were pretty desperate and gave up information just for a lucky strike. After a few days, we were loaded onto another train and taken back to a place called Sagan in the eastern part of Germany. We are now officially POWs, prisoners of war, or as the Germans called us, Kriegies. We arrived at our luxurious new dwellings, complete with barbed wire fences and armed guards, end of May 1944. Now, you may have seen a movie called The Great Escape. Well, that was about this prison camp in Sagan, Stalag Luft III. The place was huge, about 10,000 prisoners, mostly American and British, a few Poles and Canadians, and well, life was pretty bleak. The food was terrible, barracks were cramped, and the latrines were disgusting. But we did receive occasional Red Cross parcels, and as officers, we were allowed to exercise and play baseball. Now, the British had a clandestine radio in their barracks then they got daily updates on the way the war was going. As fall turned into winter, it was clear the Germans were losing ground. Just after Christmas, we could hear the sound of heavy gunfire in the distance. The Russians were advancing, and our German overlords were getting antsy. At 1800 hours on Saturday, January 27, 1945, we were given the order to pack up and leave the camp. Now, it was snowing out and freezing cold, so we put on as many clothes as we could and headed out into the blizzard. We didn't know where we were going or what was going to happen to us, but we kept on marching, dragging our feet through the snow. Rumors started to fly that we would be executed like the prisoners who had tried to make the Great Escape had been, but we kept on going, being yelled at by our guards and hearing distant cannon fire. Some of the men had dysentery and were forced to relieve themselves on the side of the road. We headed south and west, passing through town after town until we reached a place called Spremberg. We walked 52 miles in 5 days and 5 nights. 10,000 of us. The line was so long that the last man out of camp didn't leave until nearly 6 hours after the first. We were exhausted, hungry, sick. Many had frostbite. It had been a nightmare. At Spremberg, we were loaded into cattle trucks known as 40 and 8s. Now, these were boxcars that could hold either 40 men or 8 horses. No room to lie down. We were crammed together, shoulder to shoulder, as we rattled along for endless hours until we reached a place called Moosburg, just outside of Munich. Again, we were herded into a prison camp, this time with POWs from all over Europe, about 120,000 all told. Conditions were grim, but we received news daily of the advancing U.S. Third Army led by General George Patton. And sure enough, after a brief skirmish on the morning of Saturday, April 29th, 1945, he rolled into the camp, ivory-handled revolvers and all. We were finally liberated. Men were weeping, hugging each other, falling to their knees in prayer. Patton immediately organized proper food for us, and we had our first real meal in almost a year. When I was taken prisoner, I was 200 pounds. When Patton and his boys arrived, I was 130. We were then transported to a nearby airfield, and planes flew us to Le Havre on the northwestern coast of France. There were a number of transit camps where we waited for Liberty ships to take us home. For some strange reason, each camp was named for a cigarette brand: Philip Morris, Terryton, and so on. The camp I was in, as I'm sure you can guess, was called Lucky Strike.